morning, dear UPSC and NPSC aspirants. Welcome to the daily editorial and current affairs analysis. Today, we will be looking at 15 July 2026 news. Today's agenda ranges from environment and ecology all the way to history and culture. So, on the front page, we see four news. One is Supreme Court to frame SOP for urgent life and liberty cases. Then, US strikes Iran and Indian soldier killed in Strait of Hormuz. India, UK, CE, CETA, and DCC come into force from today. And Nagaland austerity advisory and Assam Rifles IED blast condemned. First, let us look at environment and ecology. So, Union government bans herbicides paraquat dichloride. The Union Ministry of Agriculture has notified a nationwide ban on the paraquat dichloride, which is a highly toxic herbicide that the farmers spray after the harvest to clear the fields for the next crop. What makes it exceptional is that it has no known antidote. Once a toxic dose enters the body, there is no reversal. It has been linked to thousands of the deaths in India through self-harm, homicide, and accidental poisoning. A doctor from the group Doctors Against Paraquat in Telangana welcomed the decision, noting that an earlier ban could have saved many farmers and the young people. The centre's ban follows a series of the state-level bans, most recently by Andhra Pradesh and earlier by Telangana and Kerala, that created a patchwork where the chemical was outlawed in some states but sold freely in others. Paraquat is already prohibited in European Union and many other countries, yet it remained widely available in India because it is cheap and effective at the post-harvesting field clearing. The pesticides in India are regulated by the Insecticides Act of 1968 with a pesticide management bill long pending to modernize this framework. So, the impact is that this is as much a public health decision as an agricultural one because it links the pesticide regulation to the suicide prevention through the principles of means restriction, that is, reducing the deaths by cutting the easy access to a lethal method. It connects to the World Health Organization's highly hazardous pesticides and to India's obligations under the Rotterdam Convention, which requires prior informed consent before the trade is trading listed hazardous chemicals. It also reframes the farm input policy as a question of balancing the agricultural utility against the human cost of an unusually lethal and antidote-less substance. Way forward is to promote safer weed control alternatives and run farmer awareness drives and enforce strictly against the illegal stocks that may persist in the market, and then undertake a wider review of the remaining class 1 or the extremely hazardous pesticides. Next, the Indian greenhorn bill, which had vanished from Gujarat's Gir forest between 1950 and 1960, has now recorded 4 consecutive years of successful breeding after being deliberately reintroduced, according to a peer-reviewed study in the journal Birds. The 4 straight breeding seasons matter because they show the birds are not merely surviving but establishing a self-sustaining population and making this a rare and well-documented success in the restoration ecology. The project released 40 Indian grey hornbills in 2 phases, 28 birds in 2021-22 and 12 in 2023-23 in the Gujarat's Junagadh circle. 11 males were fitted with the satellite transmitters to track their movement, habitat use, and the breeding behavior, providing hard evidence behind the study. In a parallel conservation win the same day, Gujarat reported a second Great Indian Bustard chick, which has had hatched using the jumpstart technique, surviving past the critical 40 days. The hornbill is a long-distance seed disperser. By eating the fruit and spreading the seeds across the large areas, it helps regenerate the fruit-bearing trees, making it a keystone species whose return benefits the whole forest ecosystem. The case validates reintroduction and translocation as legitimate conservation tools, echoing India's cheetah translocation and the Great Indian Bustard programs, and show the value of following the IUCN reintroduction guidelines and satellite monitoring to verify the outcomes rather than assume them. Way forward is to sustain the habitat protection, monitor the second generation breeding to confirm the long term viability, replicate the model in other degraded landscapes, and embed local community stewardship so the gains endure. Next, let us look at the macroeconomy. India UK Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement and the accompanying Double Contribution Convention come into the force from 15th of July 2026, having been signed in the July last year. Commerce Secretary Rajesh Agarwal called it a gold standard pact and one of India's most ambitious free trade agreements, framed as benefiting the farmers, fisherfolk, workers, and the women entrepreneurs. Its entry into the force matters because the tariff and the service concessions now become legally operational for the exporters and the workers on both the sides. On the tariffs, the UK immediately eliminates duties on 96.8% of its tariff lines, covering 97.7% of the trade value, while India immediately removes the duties on 30.3% of the trade value, phased in a further 47%, and applies quota-based cuts on 12.1%. Overall, India liberalizes 89.5% of the lines, that is 89.4% of the trade value, and UK liberalizes 98.9% of the lines, amounting to 99.5% of the trade value. The agreement's 30 chapters span the goods, services, digital trade, government procurements, small and medium enterprises, labor, environment, and gender, making it far broader than a tariffs only deal. So the DCC is the standout for services because Indian professionals on the short UK postings will not have to pay social security contributions in both the countries for up to 5 years, a relief expected to benefit about 75,000 workers and 900 plus employers and to make Indian services more competitive in Britain. The deal also tackles non-tariff barriers, especially sanitary and phytosanitary, food safety, and the TBT technical standards, and deliberately shields the sensitive Indian sectors like dairy sector, cereals, gold and jewelry, smartphones, and critical polymers. This is billed as first future-oriented free trade agreement between two major economies. It becomes a template for pending India-EU free trade agreement and a draw for City of London capital. And way forward is to ensure effective implementation and the strong MSME uptake, monitor service mobility under the DCC, and use the momentum to conclude the India-EU free trade agreement and mobilize the global capital. Next, the India's imports from China rose 21.8% in the first half of 2026 to a record 79.41 billion, according to China customs data. The two-way trade reached 91.72 billion, up 23.6% year on year, and is on track to surpass the record 155.62 billion of 2025 when China was once again India's biggest goods trade partner, and India's exports to the China also grew up 37.2% to $12.31 billion, but from a much smaller base, leaving this relationship which is heavily lopsided in favor of China. So India's overall trade deficit in the June 2026 rose more than fourfold year on year to $15.3 billion. This is driven by heavy merchandise imports, costlier crude oil, electronics, and gold. With China specifically, the bilateral deficit has crossed $67.1 billion in the first half alone, and a scale that concentrates the strategic attention on having a single trading partner and on the categories India cannot easily source elsewhere. So the officials are less worried about the size of the deficit than the composition of the deficit. India imports finished electronics plus intermediary inputs that the Indian manufacturing and even India's own exports depend on, while its exports to the China remain low value in form of organic chemicals, ores, and the seafoods. This dependency is a supply chain vulnerability and not just an accounting gap. Speaking at the World Peace Forum in Beijing, India's ambassador Vikram Doraiswamy pushed for greater Indian exports in areas where India is competitive, notably the pharmaceutical sectors, seeking a widening basket and the consumer protection mechanisms to rebalance the trade. And the way forward is to diversify the import sources, push the value added and the pharmaceutical exports via uh, performance linked incentive schemes, and the supply chain resilience, reduce the reliance on the Chinese intermediaries, and negotiate deeper and more balanced market access. Next, the government released the inaugural trial of the Index of Service Production, a service sector counterpart to the long established Index of Industrial Production. In April 2026, 14 of the 19 tracked subsectors grew in double digits, with the strongest performance in accommodation and food, retail trade, administrative and support services, and real estate. The launch matters because the services are over half of India's GDP, yet they have lacked a high frequency IIP style measure. The 19 subsectors account for roughly 60% of India's service sector, and the ISP will be published on 29th of each month, and Index of Industrial Production appears on 28th. So it uses the base year of 2024-25 and draws on the administrative records, GST data, and the annual survey of incorporated service sector enterprises. By Ernst& Young economist D.K. Srivastava's estimate, the 19 services grew 20.8% year on year in April 2026. The index is produced within the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, the National Statistical Organization statistical system. So the ISP fills a long-standing statistical gap, that is, the measuring services at the monthly frequency strengthens India's data system and support evidence-based policy, complementing the index of industrial production to give a fuller, more timely picture of the real economy. Its debut came alongside other notable macro signals on the same day, such as the wholesale price index inflation rose to 9.87% in June from 9.68%, and the food inflation at 5.49% amid a rainfall deficit due to the El Nino, and the Sensex fell 561 points on the West Asia oil surge. This underlines why the faster services data helps read the economy in the real time. The way forward is to move from trial to a full index with a headline composite growth rate and widen the coverage across the services and improve the timeliness and the granularity so that this becomes as trusted as the index of industrial production. Then, India has notified a ban on importing the goods manufactured wholly or partly using the forced labor, empowering the Commerce Ministry to specify from time to time the goods whose import is prohibited. The move is a deliberate step toward signing an interim trade agreement with the United States and signals that India is willing to align its trade rules with the international labor standards. The United States is finalizing the tariffs on the countries it judges to have done too little against the forced labor goods. Its draft found that India and 53 other countries failed to impose or effectively enforce such prohibitions, and thus proposed a 12.5% tariff. In response, India's foreign trade policy now incorporates the definition of the forced labor from ILO Forced Labor Convention, which is Convention number 29, with inquiries to be conducted by the Directorate General of the Foreign Trade under the Handbook of Procedures 2023. This is a significant shift in the approach. India moves from relying only on the labor and the criminal laws to a dedicated trade instrument aligned with the international norms, as noted by Grant Thornton's Manoj Mishra. It also links to a second US probe on the excess capacity exports and is central to India establishing a comparative advantage over the competitors before an interim US deal is signed. This is turning a defensive compliance step into a negotiating asset. So, way forward is to build the Director General of the Foreign Trade's inquiry machinery and supply chain due diligence capacity and help the exporters document the clean supply chains and lock in comparative tariff advantage in the US agreement. Next, let us look at the sectors of the economy. The Railway Minister Ashwini Vaishnav announced a package of the reforms to modernize infrastructure, streamline the freight, logistics, and shift to eco-friendly operations. The two headline measures are moving the bulk commodities from open wagons into the closed containers and transporting the fly ash in closed, leak-proof containers to curb the dust pollution that open transport causes. Of the roughly 340 million tons of fly ash India generates each year, only about 13 million tons currently moves by rail in the open wagons, so the shift addresses a large pollution and logistics gap. Railways carry 85% of India's fertilizers and food grains now will move in the containers with a simple per kilometer rate, replacing the today's complex multi-slab tariff. The single unified container train license with a 25 crore non-refundable fee replaces the four separate route categories, and the private industry is now empowered to design custom wagons and space earlier, which is tightly controlled by Research Designs and the Standards Organization under Ministry of Railways. So the reforms pursue three goals at once. One, cutting the pollution, simplifying the logistics, and raising the rail share of the freight against the road, which lowers the national logistics cost and the emissions. To improve the project delivery, a 10% performance security deposit is now required at the contract start to deter the non-serious contractors. Taken together, the measure plugs into the National Logistics Policy, Pradhan Mantri Gati Shakti, and India's decarbonizing goals, using the pricing and the licensing design, not just spending, to change the behavior. Way forward is to scale the containerization, attract the private investment in the custom wagons, ensure timely project delivery, and steadily raise the rails freight model share to cut the logistics costs and the carbon. Next, a Nagaland University led backyard poultry project in Zuniboto enabled 60 women from 5 self-help groups to collectively earn 30.8 lakhs while improving their household's access to the poultry, meat, and eggs. Separately, Kezoma village in Kohima district was recognized as a model village for millet cultivation and received modern threshing and milling machines. These two grassroots examples of how targeted support raises the rural incomes in Northeast. The poultry project, formally titled Promoting Sustainable Livelihoods and the Nutritional Security of the Women SHGs through Low-Cost Egg Incubator and the Backyard Poultry Production, was run by Krishi Vignan Kendra at Zuniboto under Nagaland University and was funded by NABARD. It produced 22,618 eggs and 1,380 birds, with beneficiary households earning about 32,592 rupees of net profit. The need is real because Nagaland faces a shortfall of roughly 1,520 lakh eggs and 38.5 metric tons of meat. So, the findings were published in the International Journal of Agricultural Extension and Social Development. The case shows how KVK-led low-cost technology can lift the rural incomes and empower the women economically and improve the nutritional security all at once. The Millet Revival aligns with the International Year of Millet's legacy and Sri Anna Push, while the mechanization cuts the post-harvest losses and drudgery for the cultivators. It connects NABARD's financing, the nationwide KVK extension network, and the SHG-led livelihood model such as the Deen Dayal Antyodaya Yojana National Rural Livelihood Mission, a template that is especially valuable in the hill economies within markets. The way forward is to scale up the low-cost incubators, expand the SHG value chains beyond the production, and replicate the millet mechanization in other villages and strengthen local seed and feed supply so gains are self-sustaining in nature. Next, let us look at the polity, governance, and legislation. The Supreme Court of India agreed to consider framing a standard operating procedure that would let the citizens approach the court at any hour, day or night, in cases affecting life and liberty, such as illegal detentions, imminent home demolitions, deportation, or custodial violence. A three-judge bench, headed by Chief Justice of India Suryakant, is hearing a petition by Advocate Maharavish Rain, who argued that the protection of liberty cannot depend on court schedules. The Constitution cannot fall silent at night. And the Chief Justice of India suggested that the court's response to an urgent motion could come within an hour. Solicitor General Tushar Mehta advised that an SOP be framed on the court's administrative side rather than the judicial side and cautioned that the High Courts fall outside the Supreme Court's administrative ambit in a federal structure, a practical limit on how uniform such a framework can be. The concern is real world that late night arrests and the early morning demolitions often occur on weekends and holidays when the courts are closed. So the move would strengthen the access to justice anchored in Article 21, which is the protection of life and personal liberty, and the remedies under Article 32 and 300 and 226 beyond the designated court hours. Justice Joymala Babji observed that a graded approach after hours is not a denial of justice, and that digital access through e-filing, email, and phone mentioning already keep the courts effectively open. The case is therefore about the institutionalizing emergency judicial access in the digital era while respecting the constitutional division between the Supreme Court and the High Courts. The way forward is to institutionalize a uniform emergency access framework that leverages the digital infrastructure, preserves the judicial discretion, and clarifies the administrative boundaries between the Supreme Court and the High Courts. The Election Commission's Special Intensive Revision, which is a deep house-to-house cleaning of the electoral rolls, is underway across many states and is generating extensions and legal disputes. The EC extended the SIR schedule of Andhra Pradesh and Haryana under the Phase 3, which was rolled out on the May 14th across the 16 states and UTs. In Karnataka, the Greater Bengaluru Authority sought to postpone the civic polls, arguing that the staff are tied up in the special intensive revision. In Andhra Pradesh and the Haryana, house to house enumeration is extended to July 24th and draft rolls to July 31st and final rolls to October the 3rd. In Uttarakhand, the SIR draft showed 71.33 lakh voters with 8.26 lakh facing possible deletion, down from 79.6 lakh earlier. Telangana Congress urged an extension, saying only about 21% of Hyderabad was done. In Nagaland, DC Kohima urged the supervisor to master the SIR guidelines through the electoral registration officers, assistant EROs, and the booth level officers. The GBA poll case was expected to be listed around the July 17th. The SIR aims at accurate, credible rules, but it raises real concerns: mass deletions and the possible disenfranchisement, and the clashes of the timing with the local elections, and the strain on the administrative bandwidth. It runs on the ERO, AERO, and the BLO machinery under the ECI's guidelines, and the details matter. As for example, in Karnataka, for instance, the draft rules published on the August the 5th and the final rules on October the 7th. The core tension is between the role accuracy and the voter inclusion, which is why the grievance redress and the verification time are central to the public trust in the exercise. The way forward is to balance accuracy with the inclusion through robust grievance redress and adequate verification time, clear communication and transparency so that the legitimate voters are not dropped and the confidence in the rules is maintained. Supreme Court declined to restore the status quo ante after Madhya Pradesh High Court declared the Bodhshala Kamal Maula complex in Dhar a temple dedicated to goddess Saraswati and barred the Friday namaz. As an interim measure, a bench headed by Chief Justice of India Surya Kant asked the Madhya Pradesh government to identify an open space near the site for Friday namaz between 1 to 3 p.m. and barred the Archaeological Survey of India from making any structural alteration without the court's permission. The Hindu side regards Bodhshala as a Saraswati temple, while the Muslim side calls it a 11th century monument, the Kamal Maula Mosque. On May 15th, the High Court had quashed decades-old ASI order that allowed the Friday prayers at the site. The appellants, who are senior advocates uh, A.M. Singhvi and Huzaifa Ahmadi, urged the status quo, invoking the Places of Worship Special Provisions Act of 1991, which was enacted to freeze the religious character of the places of the worship as they stood on 15th of August 1947, with the Ayodhya dispute a stated exception. The case is a live test of the 1991 Act at a moment when the survey petitions are multiplying, like in the case of Gyan Vapi and Taj Mahal reference among them. The Supreme Court stressed the matter is very sensitive and tried to balance the communal harmony against the need to adjudicate while raising the questions about ASI's role over centrally protected monuments and about judicial restraint. How the Act is interpreted here will shape whether the other contested sites can be reopened for fresh surveys. The way forward is to proceed to day hearing, uphold the spirit of 1991 Act, and ensure no structural change to the protected monument and preserve the communal peace pending a final decision. Then the next news is about, can English be an Indian language? The Supreme Court questioned the CBSE's classification of English as a non-native language under three-language scheme, observing that English has been spoken in India for more than 300 years and is issued for official communication in at least five states. Uh, Justice Jayamala Bagchi asked whether English could itself be treated as an indigenous Indian language, calling the term native a colonially loaded one, a framing that goes to the heart of how India defines its own languages. So, the CBSE circular of the July 10 distinguishes Bharatiya Bhashas, India, Sanskrit, Tamil, Telugu, Punjabi, and others from the non-native languages, and the scheme requires class 9 students to study two languages native to India. The petitioners flagged a serious human resource crunch, like the textbooks exist only for 3 of the 22 scheduled languages, and the teaching all 22 would need 22 more teachers per school. CBSE proposed using retired or suitably qualified teachers and Sahodaya school clusters and advanced the scheme from 2030 to 2026-27. Separately, the Center, CBSE and NCRT defended the National Education Policy 2020 formula before the court as essential for multilingualism and national integration, calling it flexible and non-coercive. The dispute tests the new National Education Policy of 2020's three language formula and the NCFSE 2023 against Article 29 and 30, which is protection of the linguistic and the minority rights, the 8th schedule of the Constitution, which has 22 languages, and the federalism, the state's autonomy over the language, as seen in the Tamil Nadu's opposition. Running through it is a feasibility problem. Multilingual ambitions collide with the real gaps in the teachers and the textbooks. The court issued notices and set the next hearing date for July the 22nd, keeping alive a debate that mixes the constitutional rights, center state relations, and the classroom capacity. The way forward is to reconcile the multilingual goals with the teacher and the textbook capacity, avoid coercion, and respect the state's autonomy over language, and clarify English status with the scheme. The center told Supreme Court that it has amended the Right of Persons with the Disabilities Act of 2016 to widen the definition of the acid attack victim to include people with internal injuries from being made to ingest acid or similar corrosive substances, not only those injured by the acid being thrown. Solicitor General Tushar Mehta cited a notification dated May 22nd, and importantly, the amendment is retrospective, so the victims of forcible ingestion before May 2026 can also claim benefits. The 2016 law earlier recognized only the victims of acid throwing, leaving out the survivors of the forcible ingestion, even though the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, which replaced the Indian Penal Code, already covers both uh, throwing and administering acid punishable from 10 years up to the life under Section 124 for voluntarily causing the grievous hurts, uh, grievous hurt by the acid. In May, Supreme Court used its power under Article 142 to include survivors of the forcible acid administration after senior advocate Mukul Rohatgi argued they could not be left out of the law's protection. Then, the change aligns the disability rights law with the criminal law under the BNS and expands the entitlements such as reservation and welfare benefits to broader set of the survivors. And it is also a clear example of judicial nudge driving executive and legislative reform. The court's use of Article 142 pushed the government to close a gap in the statute concerning what the bench described as among the most ruthless and the most heinous crimes. Then, way forward is to ensure the retrospective benefits actually reach the eligible victims and standardize the medical certification of internal injuries and strengthen the rehabilitation and compensation frameworks. Next, the Nagaland government issued an austerity advisory directing all the departments and the PSUs to rationalize the spending. The measures include restricting non-essential foreign visits, rationalizing the official convoys, deferring study tours, switching off the lights, ACs after office hours, restricting decorative lighting, promoting paperless transactions, and local first protocol that prioritizes local food, tea, coffee, handloom, and handicrafts. It was notified by the Finance Department's Budget and Monitoring Cell and is in force until March 2027. Chief Secretary Sentianger Imchen described the steps as reflecting the minimum essential level spending and responsible governance. Separately, uh, Morung Express has also flagged that employees drawing the full salaries without attending the office or work as a drain on the public resources, invoking the private sector no work, no pay principle, and the idea that the public office is a public trust rather than a source of unconditional income. The advisory reflects the genuine fiscal stress in a resource dependent state that leans heavily on the central transfers, and it connects to the broader themes of the fiscal responsibility and vocal for local and the sustainability. The accompanying accountability debate raises the workforce planning. biometric attendance, and the performance monitoring questions resting on simple principle salary is the remuneration for the services rendered and not charity. Together, spending restraint and staff accountability are two sides of making the scarce public money go further. The way forward is to conduct time bound energy audits, build transparent attendance and performance systems, redeploy surplus staff to the understaffed departments, and channel the savings into priority sectors such as the schools, health, and the roads. Next, let us look at the international relations. The United States launched strikes on Iran, hitting the coastal defenses, the missile and the drone sites, and the maritime capabilities after President Trump vowed to reinstate a blockade of the Iranian ports and the charge ships for the safe passage through Strait of Hormuz. Iran retaliated with attacks on Bahrain, Jordan, and three tankers transiting the strait. Two UAE flagged tankers carrying the Indian seafarers MT Al Bahia and MT Mombasa were hit. One Indian sailor was killed and several were injured, bringing the crisis directly to India's doorstep. India summoned the Iranian deputy chief of mission and lodged a strong protest conveyed by Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson uh, Ranadhir Jaiswal, urging de-escalation and safe and unimpeded navigation. Of roughly 30 Indian seafarers among a crew of 46, one of one of the 12 aboard the Al Bahia died and 9 of the 18 aboard the Mombasa were injured. Trump first announced a 20% Hormuz levy on the passage, then withdrew it in favor of the trade deals with Gulf allies and keeping a full blockade only on the Iranian linked cargo. India launched a seafarer first response, real time vessel by vessel monitoring, and dedicated liaison officers under the Ministry of Ports, Shipping and Waterways. So, the Strait of Hormuz carries a large share of world's seaborne oil and LNG. So, any disruption spikes the oil, fertilizer, and the freight costs. The Sensex fell on the oil surge, making this a direct energy security and inflation risk for India, which imports most of its crude oil. It also tests India's careful balancing among Iran, where India develops the Chabahar port, Israel, the Gulf states, and the United States, and its responsibility towards the large Gulf diaspora and globally significant Indian seafarer workforce. The way forward is to protect the Indian nationals and seafarers, work to secure the sea lanes, and press for de-escalation and diplomacy, diversify the energy sourcing, and safeguard the Chabahar and other connectivity interests of India. Then, India-US defense cooperation keeps producing ambitious announcements that struggle to become the real industrial outcomes. The latest snag is the impasse over the GE's General Electric's F414 fighter engine, once the centerpiece of the ISET initiative, where the per engine cost has reportedly nearly tripled from around 70 to 80 crore to 200 plus crore. And General Electric is seeking about $800 million or 7,576 crore of investment for a dedicated production line, while disputes persist over the technology transfer, intellectual property, and export controls. Since 2002, India has acquired over $22 billion of US defense equipment in form of Apache helicopters, Chinook, C-17, C-130J Hercules, P-8I, and M777, yet the genuine co-production and the technology transfer have stayed elusive. The F414 talks link the Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, which builds the Tejas Mk2, with DRDO and the ADA, which develops the AMCA and the uh, 10BF. Earlier, earlier frameworks like DTTI 2012 and ISET 2022 and IndexX 2023 are largely undelivered. The Javelin and the Striker talks have stalled, and the 31 MQ-9B drones agreed in 2024, uh, costing about $3.5 billion, looked more like a purchase than the co-development. The root problem is a philosophy gap. India seeks technology and intellectual property to advance Atmanirbharta or the self-reliance, while US treats advanced defense technology as a strategic asset tightly guarded under the international traffic in the arms regulations. As a result, the relationship has matured into a procurement partnership rather than a capability transfer one. The next test is proposed reciprocal defense procurement agreement, which could deepen the ties but might also expose India's nascent defense firms to much larger US competition. The way forward is to push for genuine co-development and the phased technology transfer, strengthen the indigenous capacity across DRDO, Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, private industry, and negotiate the RDPA carefully to protect the domestic manufacturers. Prime Minister Modi's recent visits to Australia and New Zealand marked a shift from largely economic and people-to-people ties towards a strategic partnership, consolidating India's Indo-Pacific outreach under the Act East policy and the Mahasagar vision, which is mutual and the holistic advancement for security and growth across the regions. The upgrade signals that India increasingly sees the southern Indo-Pacific as central to its security and supply chains, not just its trade. India and Australia adopted a new joint declaration on defense and security cooperation while covering enhanced interoperability, expanded military exercises, an annual defense ministers dialogue, cyber, maritime, and emerging tech cooperation, and an India Australia maritime security collaboration roadmap. Australia also agreed to allow the uranium exports for India's civil nuclear program and to cooperate on the critical minerals. India and New Zealand was elevated to form strategic partnership with a 4-year roadmap spanning Indo-Pacific maritime cooperation, mutual logistics support between Navy and the New Zealand Defence Forces, a goal of expanded bilateral trade by 2030, building on the India-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement. The visits advance several Indian priorities at once, that is, supply chain diversification, energy security through the uranium, and access to critical minerals, and cooperation on the emerging technology, while strengthening the southern arc of Indo-Pacific amid the China's growing assertiveness. They complement existing architectures such as the Quad and the Indo-Pacific Ocean Initiative, and a vision of free and open and inclusive Indo-Pacific, giving India more partners and options in a volatile region. The way forward is to operationalize the roadmaps rather than let them stay declaratory, secure the critical minerals and uranium supply chains, and deepen the maritime domain awareness and protect the strategic autonomy amid global volatility. Next, as Nepal's new government under Prime Minister Balendra Shah completed 100 days, two incidents exposed a gap between the reform promises and the actual governance. A ride-hailing driver self-immolated after parking dispute altercation with the police, and holding center for evicted riverside squatters was flooded by monsoon rains. Both cases pointed to weak planning and service delivery under a government elected precisely to fix such failures. The Rashtriya Swatantra Party won a landslide in March 5th elections on a platform of reform, accountability, and good governance. Critics now allege administrative failures, poor planning, and a high-handed style that echoes the earlier KP Sharma Oli government, and the Shah reportedly made only one public address and one parliamentary speech in his first 100 days. The civic space concerns grew after the police arrested the youth activists on July the 11th, with Amnesty International seeking the release of the injured activist Majid Ansari. Notably, this government had ridden the September 2025 Gen Z protests to power. The episode tests Nepal's democratic consolidation and touches India's neighborhood interests, an open border, connectivity, and hydropower cooperation. Suppression of the dissent, combined with the weak service delivery, risks instability next door, and Sri 8 jibe in the parliament, evoking royal era honorifics, was read as a sign of rising intolerance of criticism. For India, a stable, rights respecting Nepal is preferable to one sliding back towards a centralized, high handed rule. The way forward is to restore the civic space, improve the service delivery, disaster planning, and protect the right to protest and sustain steady India-Nepal cooperation across the open border. Next, let us look at science and technology. The researchers at the Max Planck Institute for Marine Microbiology in Germany reported first direct visual evidence of a gene, which is an RNA molecule called an intron, jumping from one organism to another across a species, doing so without a viral courier to carry it. In effect, they watched horizontal gene transfer happen in real time, something previously inferred but never directly seen. Jumping genes, known as the transposable elements, were first discovered in Mason 1950. The team studied a laboratory microbial culture seeded from sewerage wastewater containing archaea and bacteria, a predatory ultramicrobacterium, and Velominococcus archivorus that attacks the archaeon Methanothrix um, soehengeni. The intron sits in a 23S rRNA gene and can self-splice out and form a circle and is then able to jump. Using a fluorescent probe that glows green in the live cells and yellow in the dead, the researchers track the intron moving from predator into prey. This matters well beyond the microbiology because transposable elements drive the spread of antibiotic resistance and the feature in several cancers. So, the understanding how the genes jump help explain two major medical problems. One, the circular RNAs like this are self-circularizing introns are being explored as the next generation vaccine platforms. So, the mechanism has biotech value too. More broadly, watching the horizontal gene transfer directly sheds the light on the evolution on how new disease-causing microbes can rapidly acquire the traits such as resistance or novel metabolism. The way forward is to investigate whether such introns also jump in the wild, study the RNA stability mechanisms and behind self-circularization, and explore the applications in the vaccine and the gene therapy. Next, the astronomers have detected a complex sugar, um, erythrulose, in deep space for the first time inside a giant interstellar molecular cloud near the center of the Milky Way galaxy, with the findings published in the Nature Astronomy on July the 13th. What makes this notable is that unlike earlier detection of mere sugar precursors, erythrulose is itself a genuine sugar, pushing the known chemistry of the space a step closer to the molecules of life. A team affiliated with the institutions in the Spain and other five other countries used the radio telescopes to make the detections. Sugars are fundamentally the building blocks of the life. They provide metabolic energy and form the structural backbone of the RNA and the DNA. Sugars had previously been found on the meteorites and asteroids, but this is the first time one has been identified in the interstellar space between stars. The model suggests erythrulose forms on icy surface of the dust grains when simpler molecules such as glycoaldehyde and the ethylene glycol collide and react. The discovery shows that the complex life-related chemistry can assemble in the extreme cold and vacuum of the space without any planetary being involved, and such molecules could later be delivered by the comets, asteroids, and potentially seeding the early Earth, a scenario which is relevant in the panspermia. Erythrulose is also a chiral molecule, meaning it comes in the right and left-handed forms. Since the life on Earth uses only one-handedness, um, finding the chiral sugars in the space may help explain why the biology settled on the handedness it did. The way forward is to search for even more complex biomolecules in the space, study the origins of the chirality, and probe how the comet and the asteroid delivery may have brought such molecules to the early Earth. Next, the Center released the Draft National Health Research Policy 2026, aimed to align India's scientific research with its actual disease burden and the public health priorities. It proposes a wide restructuring of the health research ecosystem with a focus on the indigenous innovation, evidence-based policy making, and measurable outcomes, and was prepared by Department of Health Research. This is the first attempt at a unified national framework spanning biomedical science, clinical medicine, public health, epidemiology, digital health, health systems, behavioral science, and emerging technologies, the fields that have so far been governed in silos. It squarely targets three weaknesses. One is fragmented research. Second, the regional disparities in the research capacity and India's research and the slow transition of finding into the actual patient care. It also notes that India's research capacity in form of the Indian Council for Medical Research and the universities is concentrated in just few institutions and the states. The draft proposes a three-tier governance structure with National Health Research Stewardship Committee for strategic coordination at the top, the Department of the Health Research as the nodal body, and ICMR as the scientific and the technical lead, with the states expected to embed the research within their health programs. The ethics, data governance, cybersecurity, and the community participation are treated as the core principles alongside the long-term targets for the research investment, medical science PhDs, publications, and the patents, signaling a shift from ad hoc funding to measurable, coordinated national effort. The way forward is to finalize the policy after the stakeholder feedback, periodically identify the priority research areas by the disease burden, cut the administrative delays that slow the research, and deliberately strengthen the research capacity at the state level. The next news is the Nagaland State Disaster Management Authority had forecast localized thunderstorms, lightning, and light to moderate rainfall across several parts of the state between July 15th and 18th. The districts likely to be affected include Kohima, Longland, Mokokchung, Noklak, Pek, Shamator, Semenyu, Tunsang, and Zunuputo, with heavier rain expected in Longland and Mon on July the 15th. A routine but important early warning exercise for monsoon vulnerable hill state. The NSTMA advisory specifically warned residents in landslide and waterlogging prone areas to exercise caution and noted that the heavy rain was also likely at fewer places like Kifire, Noklok, Peran, Pek, and Shamator on July 18. Citizens were urged to follow the NSTMA website and Safer Nagaland app for real-time updates reflecting a push towards tech-enabled last-mile dissemination of warnings. The advisories reflect a hill state's structural vulnerabilities to landslides, flash floods, and cloudbursts during the monsoon and illustrates the role of state disaster management authorities operating under the Disaster Management Act of 2005 and the NDMA guidelines. It underscores the importance of the early warning, coordination with the IMD, and technology-enabled community preparedness with Safer Nagaland app serving as a last-mile alert tool that can reach the citizens directly rather than through slower official channels. The way forward is to strengthen the early warning dissemination and invest in the slope stabilization and drainage, improve the last mile alerts, integrate the apps with the IMD forecasts so that the warnings can translate into proactive and life saving response. Next, let us look at the history and culture. The Northeast Frontier Railway completed the redevelopment of three more stations under Amrit Bharat station scheme. One is the Majbat in Rangia Division, Assam, Jalpaiguri Road in Alipurduar Division of West Bengal, and Haldibari in Kathiawar Division, modernizing the stations while preserving the local heritage character. Separately, Nagaland Conservatory of Music concluded a choral collaboration titled Echoes of the Hills with uh, Chiang Mai University in Thailand, using music as a form of cultural diplomacy. The redeveloped railway stations, um, Majbat at 10.19 crore, Jalpaiguri Road with 34.80 crore, and Haldibadi with 26 crore, feature improved passenger circulation, Divyangjan friendly, accessible facilities, and modern amenities, while reflecting the regional heritage. The Link One Station, One Product initiatives promote the indigenous products and local artisans at these stations. Uh, Simultaneously, Nagaland Chiang Mai collaboration, supported by the Indian Studies Center and the Consulate of India in Chiang Mai, used music to transcend the cultural and the linguistic boundaries and strengthen India Thailand people to people ties as part of the Act East agenda. Taken together, these two developments illustrate the complementary strands of India's approach in the Northeast. One is infrastructure led heritage preservation, paired with multimodal connectivity, and soft power cultural diplomacy that advances the Act East engagement. The concrete links are Amrit Bharat Station Scheme and the One Station One Product on the infrastructure side, cultural diplomacy under IECCR and Ministry of the Indian Council for Cultural Relations and the Ministry of External Affairs on the outreach side, showing how railway modernization and the cultural exchange can each serve a broader strategic and development purpose. The way forward is to complete the station modernization with genuine heritage sensitivity, expand OSOP to support the local livelihoods, and deepen the cultural engagements that reinforce India's activist engagement. Next, let us look at the questions for the main practice. The Places of Worship Special Provisions Act of 1991 seeks to preserve the communal harmony yet faces renewed legal challenges through survey petitions, examine its scope, and the judiciary's balancing role. The instability in the Strait of Hormuz poses acute risks to India's energy security, diaspora, and the trade. Discuss India's balancing act among Iran, Israel, Gulf, and the US. Third, the free trade agreements like India UK CETA are built as gold standard. Critically assess the opportunities they create and the safeguards needed for India's sensitive sectors. Finally, the Indo Naga peace process must move from ceasefire to positive peace. Discuss the difference and what durable peace in the Northeast requires. That's it for today. We will meet again tomorrow. And thank you.